All right, so I've had a few requests to show how I model things like this, and so we're going to jump into the workflow of it. I don't know if we'll be able to achieve this kind of result here. This takes roughly 3-4 hours. I think I was working on this one, but um, it's really not that hard, and I've kind of showed this process before. Just keep in mind, this isn't a beginner tutorial, and I'm not going to be showing like shortcuts and hotkeys. I will turn on the screencast for operators. I use custom shortcuts hotkeys, so screencast doesn't work for that shortcuts, right? But you'll be able to see the operators. I'll try to mention what tools I'm using, where you can access these kinds of things in this process. This starts in 2D though. Sketching out ideas is usually what I go with first before I even start to approach something like that. And then I'll probably do like a block out or play around with the idea and try to model it up little by little. Okay, just keep that in mind. And so we'll be playing with those kinds of shapes and whatnot in this video. We're going to be using add-ons. Machine Tools Deus Ex version. I don't know if I'll be using some of the features in that. The Deus Ex version is the paid version. Machine Tools is free though, and has a lot of the same features. Mesh Machine, we'll be using that. Loop Tools, Bool Tools possibly. We'll see what happens here. Generally speaking, it starts with a default cube. You kind of hit Alt-Z, I can get in and out. I want to be able to turn wireframes on and off. So right click that little icon and you can add that to a shortcut. You can turn it on and off when you need it. And Alt-Z, you can turn on X-ray on and off. I will be using selection methods in edit mode here. More or less, I may be using loops, rings, all kinds of fun stuff in here. I'll be doing insets, extrudes. When I do insets, a lot of times I'm holding control, so it does like an extrude along normals basically. Or I might be using other little shortcuts like hitting B to do boundaries and stuff like that. With that in mind, organics are kind of simple in nature when you're doing subdivision workflow because you apply a SubD, okay, and we're going to turn it off in edit mode. So when we're in edit mode, it's the cage, and in object mode, it turns back into the subdivision mesh. Now, I'm using the Modifierless Add-On. When you have to apply these things, just press Control A over your modifier normally, but this is another free add-on you can utilize. And one last one is we might be using an add-on called SetFlow. Just keep that in mind. You might see me use that as well. Now, and if I've had a couple Blender artists say this before, where they're like, I don't want to learn any add-ons. I just want vanilla Blender. And that's fine if you're just beginning. Just keep in mind as you're trying to get into making more complicated things, add-ons are the way to go usually. There's a lot of things that are missing from vanilla Blender that other programs have, like Maya or Max. And when you get these add-ons going, like Machine Tools, for example, it makes life a whole lot easier. Start with Machine Tools and go out from there. You're going to really enjoy it because we'll be using like align pies and setting origin points possibly or something. I don't know. But I just want to make some organic shape. All right. And that's all that really matters here for the first part of this. And how you make this is really up to you. You can even do hard surface shape. I'm just going to start moving polygons around, pressing E, extruding. And the only thing I really care about here, Control-Alt-Shift-S is a secret. You can actually skew things. You might have to hit X, Y, or Z. The only thing that really matters here, though, is that as I'm modeling this, I want to keep these more squared up, not rectangles. Okay, that's kind of the topology I'm looking for here in this situation. And we're going to go through. We can add loop cuts. So Control R, just add some loop cuts. We're not going to worry if it's a little bit soft at this point. That's okay. The next section we should, or the next iteration, we should be able to hold the shape here a lot better. Anyways, you do want to try to work these things out in a meaningful manner, though. You really want to say, for like example, we want this to be more squared and not so rounded. There's a couple different ways you can do this. You can actually use two modifiers on top of each other. So I do another subdivision. So we got two of them. The first one we use just simple, and the second one we can use Catmull-Clark subdivision algorithm there. We can get a result like this going. Now the problem with this is if I turn off optimal display, this is the resolution we're going to get. We need to pay attention to the resolution, especially if we're going to try to combine meshes together later on, because it will come into play on what's going to happen here. So this method may not work out too well. However, if we were to say like add loop cuts all over the place as well, we don't want to like really slam them into the corners. Let's turn this off in edit mode. We don't want to like really slam them into the corners like this. That's not going to be, generally that's not going to be very good for what we're trying to achieve here. So we want to try to avoid that. If we need sharpness to this, we're going to do it later on. Okay, just keep that in mind. For the most part, that's what we're going to do. All right, but we can polymodel this pretty heavily. We can push and pull polygons, and get the shapes we want, get them going. So we could just do things like scaling on X. You know, we can even go as far as starting to do insets here, although I don't recommend it just yet if you can avoid it, because what's going to end up happening is when you do an inset, if I can select here, I'm using Control and Shift to select quads like that. But if you do an inset, this kills flow or directs flow into things. So it does create a little self-contained section here, which is nice, but the next step is usually where I'll do that. So we're going to go through this process as fast as possible. And generally speaking, it's nice to sometimes use separate objects, right? And do this independently from other things. So perhaps we're making some kind of weapon or something like that, some kind of sci-fi weapon. We might be doing a number like this. We can apply the subdivision in object mode, just hit Control 1 and make sure it's at level 1 in the viewport. And so we can just start to work these things out and make those kinds of shapes we want, those changes and everything, right? So we're going to do that. And you just want to be pretty generic with it almost. You don't want to get too carried away. Alt Q, you can switch between meshes a lot faster than going back into object mode. Right. So maybe we got something like this going on. You can place hard surface elements into the mix of all this. It's going to work out a little bit different though. If you still want to subdivide your hard surfaces, this is definitely the time you're probably going to use the subdivision simple and then go ahead and do subdivision regular. That's going to work out quite well for you, I think. And so you can go ahead and make whatever. Maybe this is something like that, right? And so you'll want to add loop cuts to this one a little bit more, just to hold those edges there a little bit stronger, right? They're still going to be pretty soft. Just remember, video games in general, softer is better usually for the for a lot of game objects, because at low poly, you can put high poly on it, right? Like the high poly bake, but the edges, the view distance from the model is can be quite important. So if you're doing obviously a weapon, first person view is probably what you need to focus on. But if you're just doing generic third person weapons, or general third person weapons, should I say, not generic, but inset, turn on edge rail, that's good. It just allows it to stay on the rails here of the wireframe. And so you can do things like this, but once again, we're pushing the polygon count up in that area. So if we turn off optimal display, you see those are more rectangular, these are more squared. You got to avoid things like that. All right, that's what we're getting at here. And so this is going to be really interesting here shortly, because what ends up happening, I'm going to actually just use this mesh over, so I don't feel like creating modifiers again. So you can do lazy things like that if you want. But it's going to get really interesting because we're going to be doing, I don't know what we're making. I have no idea what this is going to look like. So we're just going for it. You're going to see something interesting take off here though. And that is the simple fact that you can sculpt on top of this and make things look really, really good the way you want it to. But you can do a lot of like seams and paneling right on the model without really any major problems. Right here, I do want to kind of rotate this one. I could skew it as well if I wanted to, but I want to rotate this one because it's just not working out the way I thought it would if I was going to extrude from the side there. So we'll do a number like that and scale it in, scale it in. All right, so it's a little bit more hard surface like. We could try to divide this up a little bit better. This is why you have to make everything squared, because if you are going to sculpt on it, it's pretty important. And sometimes having things skew, this topology is going to dictate what you're creating, basically. And so you really have to be careful with it, because you're going to make your panel lines off of that and everything else if that's what you choose to do. So I like these shapes overall, but they're not real interesting yet. And that's good. That's kind of a good thing, believe it or not, because it's going to keep you from spending too much time trying to fight with it, really. I do want to add a couple loop cuts in here. That, so it's a little stiffer. There we go. Let's see what else we can do. Overall, It's just kind of a practice project, but just want to give you an idea here of what's going on with it. So realistically, why this is so great, in my opinion, is because you can apply the multi-resolution. That multi-res is going to let you do something really fascinating, which is if you keep this in multiple sections or pieces or parts, you can force Blender to just use an insane amount of polygons, but you don't have to view them. So you can actually bake them out, which is kind of cool. You can only go so far with it while baking, but you can actually do that, which is really cool. And so you'll see what I'm talking about here. Hopefully in this video, it'll make a little bit more sense. And I'm telling you right now, it's something that I've never seen another tutorial on YouTube really talk about, but it's amazing. All right. So the more objects you have, the higher your polygon count goes. That's what it pretty much happens. So I kind of want these to be more straight edged. So you can just do that, maybe put 2 loop cuts in there. So you can dissolve some and then just add the loop cuts back. And that kind of straightens it out, right? So it's more hard surface looking. So like this top one here, I can barely see it, but it's in there. All right. So we're more or less creating a grid for ourselves. You can right click, shade these smooth. We'll go with this for now. We could do a lot more to make this way more interesting, but we'll go with this for now. These objects, I'm going to move them to a new collection and call them 1. Oh, before we move it, let's duplicate it, just pull it out. Now we can move it to a new collection, just call it 1. I like to keep them in their own little files here every iteration because we're going to apply the subdivision. That's what we're going to do. We're going to apply level 1. This is what we'll get. Okay. Apply level 1 over here. That's what we'll get. We can apply level 1 here, and we can apply level 1 here. Okay. And believe it or not, though, you can see these are kind of tapering back in here. Let's undo those real quick before we continue. I'm going to actually just slice or delete the faces on the side. This will allow it to basically subdivide out to the edge there. So these faces, once they're gone, one's a little bit harder to get a hold of. So we're going to do Control right click. You can do lasso real quick. Okay. Now when these subdivide, they don't dip in the middle there, right? So we can go ahead and apply those as well. And so this matters right here. You see how these are skewed down? So if I wanted to add more details to this, we're going to be using it, as I said, like a grid modeler for now. If we were to add details to this, that's the edge flow we're going to end up with. Okay, so there is a trick if you've already gone too far and your edge flow kind of sucks. We can actually use a feature of machine tools. It's on the modes pie generally. The modes pie, when you're in edit mode, if you click on it, you'll see that there's something called surface slide if you have surface slide enabled. I showed a video how to put it onto your quick favorites so you don't have to use the modes pie. Just keep in mind that I'm using new hotkeys for machine tools. So instead of doing like 1, 2, or 3 to select or do smart face, smart edge, smart vert, or whatever, I set those to control 1, 2, and 3, and I turn off the offset edge slide. So in the key maps there for machine tools. So and then I do that little custom thing for the quick favorites to get to surface slide. So that's what's going on there. Now, if you turn this on, you'll notice that you can kind of rotate these out a little bit if you need to. It does distort the shape a little tiny bit, but it's not too bad, and that specifically is going to work fairly well, generally speaking, to be able to do this, right? It's just something you can do. Machine Tools Deus Ex version actually has a better alternative. Just going to demo that real quick. So I'm going to finish the surface slide, and that is Alt-R. You can see it's pretty much the same thing, but it's very, very customizable, so you can actually get much better results out of it, and it holds the shape much nicer in my opinion. So that's the paid version of Machine Tools there. So you can actually kind of re-straighten these things out without a big having a big deal here doing this, right? So I just want to point those two things out. You can choose either or method. It should work out okay. I believe I could select multiples, but I'm not going to push it here. So let's go ahead and move on to these guys again. This is still very low resolution, but this now gives us the opportunity to start to define like what we want and where we want things. This is a great time to run in large changes. So if you wanted to press K, C, and do some knife cutting and do some things like this, you can. Just keep in mind we're doing quad workflow, so you need to make sure all your quads are going to work where you want them to work. And so if I was to do this and select this section, I need to do a knife cut here. Okay, you can see how I went right through those polygons like so. Just press spacebar. Now I should be able to select these areas. If I was to do a bevel or a chamfer, just something like that, this will work out fine in this area where we can actually do an inset. And then we'll do another inset and hold control, and we can do that number. So when we subdivide this one time, this is the kind of result we get. Now this can create a little bit of distortion on the surface. Insets tend to do that, so you might want to actually do this later on as well, if that's something that you choose to do. So, but if you hold Alt and middle mouse click, by the way, you can kind of focus on areas. This is really efficient. So if you need to see like a crack or a crevice, you can do so without any real issues. Then just mouse wheel out. Also, while orbiting, you can hold down Alt, jump into views, quarter views, and things like that, which is fine, including top and bottom and left and right and all that. But if you hold down Alt, middle mouse click, and then use it as a gesture tool, so like right, left, bottom, top, I don't know if most people know that one, it's pretty useful as well. So we can go ahead and go through this now. Let's just kind of hammer this out. I'm not going to be doing as much talking here, but you can do things like E, S, and scale. You can add some loop cuts. You can do numbers like this. Some standard kind of subdivision workflow stuff here. It's not really going to matter a whole lot. You can consider this as creating the your low poly game model at this point, right? So this is pretty much what you're doing. You're trying to define all your major features and changes and all that fun stuff. You may not have enough resolution to hold things real sharp yet, and that's okay. You might have to take it up another level. That's just something that can occur or happens. In this situation, I want to go ahead and select all the way through here again. You can use the cursor selector by hitting C, and you need that. You can see, I can make some changes like this. I can scale it. Okay, and we got something like that going on now. Okay, not real pretty yet. Big n-gons can be problematic. We're worried about topology here. We really want to keep our flows going the way we want them to go. You can see we already got some issues with, I guess where I knifed that out. It created these additional little sections. We can dissolve those. Those aren't needed. Control X to quick dissolve. Let's see what's going on there now. Okay. So we can go, of course, add some loop cuts. If we want to hold something sharp, we can just add some polygons to it if we really want. But we are still worried about creating long rectangular sections like this. The problem is when you start adding loop cuts, a lot of times it flattens out an area, and it's going to do that. And so if you right click and use the set flow add-on, sometimes it doesn't work. You got to click your object in object mode, go back to edit mode, set flow. A lot of times it'll clean that kind of stuff up and it'll make it curvy again. Other times it causes issues, so you have to be careful. You might only get away with using it in a certain section. So you might have to do that there. In this case, it's looking like maybe just I can only get away with right there a little bit. Oh, sometimes it just doesn't work that well, and you might have to abandon it a little bit. So you'll have to align things manually and maybe use other tools like Sculpt Mode. You can still use the Smooth tool. You change the pressure around, whatever. Turn off Subdivision when you do this. That way, when you use it, it doesn't slow down dramatically. All right. We're not going to be doing that right now because it's not enough polygons to really do it. It's better to do it when it's really high poly if you're going to do that at all. All right. Certain sections like this, maybe I just want to inset, extrude, scale, and I can add some loop cuts. Remember, when you extrude these little sections, you still want to make sure they're mostly squared. Okay. Some things like right there. This should all subdivide fairly well still, but I should have thought about this before I started adding that panel line probably. If I didn't have that panel line there, I probably could have smoothed that out with set flow a little easier. So let's go ahead and work on this section. I'm just going to do a quick grab. Oh, you know what? Let's skew these around a little bit. I'm going to turn on surface slide. So this will let you just move a vertex pretty much on the surface, which is nice. And so we can make little patterns here at this point as well that might look more interesting. So let's say I wanted to skew these two back here. You can move multiples at the same time. Matter of fact, you can do whole sections, which is really cool. So you can see here if I was to move this whole section, maybe too large for this, but if I wanted to scale it all and move it, it kind of sticks to the surface still. So you can scale it up, scale it down, rotate it. You can turn on proportional edit and watch what happens here, right? Proportional edit, that little icon at the top. You can do this across the whole mesh for the most part. It just needs to be a flat surface. You can't have like the inset stuff. You can't work on that like that usually. Not very well anyways. And so I'm not sure what I did over here. I was wanting to do that differently, so let's do this. So your lines here do matter. You want to pay particular attention to them. Oh no, that was right actually. I was going lower. I didn't realize what I was doing. Okay, so let's say I wanted to select this whole area all the way up to the back here. And maybe this whole area I want to inset, extrude. You see I can't extrude now because surface slide is still on. So Control Z back to get rid of that extrude. Finish surface slide, extrude. You do that number like so. If you try to scale this, we'll get some pretty wild results. So you might want to do inset, hold Control, and then just let go of Control and do something like that. And you can go through this and work it however you see fit. But let's press Shift H. That hides the rest of the mesh. Okay. And so this is why we did that collection, so we can press H and Shift H without worrying about it coming back, because otherwise we'll see the old model. We'll have to hide it again. And so we can use proportional edit on these faces here and do numbers like this. When I press Alt H, you'll see how it's influencing it. All right, it's a pretty good little method of modeling, and it's actually really not that bad. It's pretty smooth. So if I just want to move like this down in a curve, I can do that and bring it back. Let's bring it further in. I just hit Control Z to go back. I think that's the easiest way. But you can see it's pretty good. It's a little bit in there though. Let's G twice and slide it out. Turn off proportional edit now. And we'll see what's happening here when this subdivides. If I press Control 1, okay, we got this kind of a result now. And so we can do this all over. We've already inset this section, so we can grab that whole insetted section. And we can just press Inset, hold, do it once. We're going to do it again. Okay, so we can do that, or we can press E and scale. Kind of hard to see what's going on here. Let's turn it off in edit mode. ES to scale. We can push it all the way back. We do things like that. Just remember, we're getting a lot of stretch here going on. Not maybe an ideal situation, but if you still kind of square those ones up, these become extremely rectangular. So this is where you can run into some issues. You just got to be aware of these kind of things and work these out when you're learning how to do subdivision. It's just going to help you out quite a bit to know when to do things and not to do things like that, because it could be a little bit of a problem. I do want that kind of flow there, but that would mean I need to reroute these edges all the way through. So if you really want to do things like this, you have to learn to model in quads, unfortunately. Otherwise, you could run into some issues. Fortunately, I don't think I'm going to be adding a lot of detail in this area. So this should still work out okay, because I'm not planning on modifying that section all that much, right? Shouldn't be too bad, but we can reselect it. And then maybe these sections here we just bring down as well. So we can kind of balance things as well. So we could do something like that. And then maybe this edge, as we take it all the way around, that one. Maybe just this edge, we want to just slide it down a little bit. And or we can get rid of an edge. This is a loop here. Maybe we don't need that one, right? So we slide this one into its place a little bit. Those look pretty squared. So balancing can be important as well. All right. And you may want to also take time to model in little sections as well. Right now, I want to point something out. If you do like a pill, if you had like this section, you want to create a pill here, so you inset it and you push it in. That's probably not the best topo for it, but you could try to create a pill at this point. One of those little details like that. There's another one called a half moon. You can check that out. But the thing is that this really isn't the resolution I would want to do that at, because I'm not going to have much control over it. However, I could start preparing for it by shifting the topology around. and using like surface slide here to do that. So if I wanted to straighten it out a little bit, that would be ideal, right? So when we get to that point now, on the next iteration, we'll be able to have a better looking detail there. So you do need to do that prep work, right? It's important. And so we'll go ahead and do that. Don't forget to mirror things over. You use a mirror modifier if you want. You see this one, when I mirrored it over, we got this nice double set. We're going to dissolve those. I don't think they're that important, so that's a lot better, perhaps. Can add that in there. See, I might flatten it out. It might not at this point. It's still pretty low resolution, so. All right, so we're going to take this one now, and we're going to duplicate it, and all of this in here. I'm going to go ahead and move to a new collection. I'm just going to call it 2, so I can hide that one. If I need to bring that one back, I can. We're on to 3 now. And this is where it gets fun. We're going to apply level 1 subdivisions again. You might want to model this out to the point that you know for a fact that it's going to hold volume. So just for an example, when you subdivide things, you see that like it should be holding its volume for the most part. Once it holds its volume, this top piece does much better, I think. That could be your game model technically, but if it's a little bit faceted, you might take it down another level of subdivision, keep working it, and then try to figure out how to optimize it later on. But that when you get to the point where you can create a game model, finish it out at that point. All right. Going to the high frequency details. The high frequency details you're going to use a multi-resolution modifier for, right? And so those ones will come later. But if your model doesn't hold volume, it's a bit of a problem because you won't be able to bake that high poly back to the mid poly basically. So let's go ahead and apply these though. So this one doesn't hold volume yet. So we need to keep working this. Top one isn't too bad. These ones are probably fine. We're just going to apply them anyways and reset them because we can add details to these, basically creating our own grid to work off of. We can shift and modify that grid however we choose fit to, or see fit. So we're at level 1s now. You can see everything's getting much more detailed. And so maybe we want to create some little box sections here. So if I inset this, you see how these edges are all kind of meh. Surface slide, turn it on. Machine tools, you have align, straighten. You can do things like that. And I don't know if that actually preserves it with surface slide. It should. Yeah, I don't usually use that. Usually I just line things up by eyesight, but we can do this too. Just want to show you some of the tools here that you can utilize. So if I do something like this, and it's already insetted basically, that's what that is. It's an inset. Even though we extruded it and we scaled it down, it's basically an inset. So we can actually, you see I can't extrude. Let's finish that. Let's extrude it out, scale it. Let's push it over here. We could go ahead and Shift H it. We can modify the shapes here if we wanted to, so we can skew them, pull them forward. We could say like pull these ones up if we wanted to. Just whatever we want really. And make little adjustments and things like that. You can see we're still at this resolution now though. And Alt H, bring that back. I want to just go ahead and toss in a loop here and a loop here. I'm not getting too picky. I'm not trying to get right up in there real quick like that. Like it's going to be a little bit softer because of that, but it's okay. You can balance these. That's pretty important to still take the time to balance things out. You can see we got some big rectangles going. So that base mesh we started on really influences everything we're going to be doing here. So we can see we got this cool looking little loop section as well, which is a lot of fun. But real fine panel details, probably want to wait until you're doing your high frequency stuff. So we're still doing like mid frequency secondaries. So we did primary, now we're at like secondaries now. And we can keep working this mesh over and over and over and over until we're pretty much blue in the face. And this is actually, this resolution right here is a good one to do iterations on, just to try to figure out, what you're creating, how you want it to look, and all that fun stuff. So if I press E and then S, and then like pull that in a little bit, this might get a little bit weird, but we'll try it out and see what happens here. We can do, little things like this perhaps. That doesn't look that great. I don't know if that would be ideal. Doing another inset just a little bit, and doing one more inset could work out. I don't know what the heck happened over there. I think we're just running out when we're insetting here. So let's try to inset. Control while insetting. Oh, we don't even have the right selection right now. Let's get rid of that. So we can do these little minor details as well. That's the point of this right here. All right. And these aren't very sharp. So as you go up in resolution, you can fix things like this. Maybe you want these to be sharper corners and not so rounded. We have the polygons here to do this. So we can grab a section and we can just move these in by hitting GG twice and doing that. Now you will get a little bit of stretching in that area, so it won't sculpt as well. So you may even want to do this a little bit later on if possible. But right now it's just for demo purposes. You can see what's going on. And we can make some pretty cool changes here coming up on the next iteration anyway. So we'll just keep going. You can work this pretty much however you see fit. You can try doing things like, for example, the Flatten Tool. With loop tools, that flattens along the normal. Sometimes that's quite useful. Get you some of that hard surface element going again. You might want to do it like right here. Maybe not right there. Let's do it right here. Keep selecting those right there. Okay, loop tools, flatten. Might help out right there to give it just a little bit of a flatter appearance. Cursor selector, since that one didn't want to work, that not circle, flatten. You can do circles as well. So circles usually like to work off of 4 polygons, 4 faces, or more. Anything squared, should I say squared selection. So if you have a 3x3 section, a 4x4 section, you can click circle and do this number. You'll see it lays it out, it flattens it. You don't have to use flatten, but it doesn't work too well. But it does flatten it like this, so just keep that in mind. Something fun here that you can do is you can turn on surface slide, and then you can go ahead and do the inset, loop tools, flatten it, set your orientation to normal. Circle it, should I say, not flatten it. There we go. When it's set to normal, you press R and Z. You can rotate the section there like that, right? Okay. Generally speaking, having these stretch out way far away like that is not good practice. Just so you know, that's where a lot of guys get really weird distortions and stuff. And this going all the way back out to there is going to create a really big non-planar face. And so that could be a problem as well. So just pay attention to things like this when you lay them in, how much resolution you need. You need to be working up. If you can't do something quite yet, you can add faces. However, sometimes it's easier just to wait to go up more. So we can finish that surface slide out. You see how big of a role that plays. It's an extremely useful tool that Blender just does not have by default. You have to go through setting up like a shrink wrap modifier. It's really a big pain. But now we have the ability to do things like this, right? No problems. You can even take this section here, add a loop cut, and then just slam it down and watch what we get, right? Get something like that. We could try doing maybe like could do a loop cut, a bevel. Oh, if I can actually bevel that correctly. Do it again, and then just push it down. Get something like that, a little bit different. All right. This section here, I want to see it come back up, believe it or not. I don't like the way it's doing. So I think, if you ever mess up something like this, you can actually just delete it usually. I don't know if this one will work, but we'll see. Select the whole section, Control F, and do a grid fill. Generally that works. And you can see it did in fact work. So you can inset it, inset it again, hold Control, inset it again. There we go. So now we got some like paneling kind of stuff going on down here now. All right. Really not that bad, right? These sections, just like well, these ones are a lot more dense than these actually. So we probably didn't need to apply those yet. This is already on like the next level here. So just remember that. But basically same process here. You can select things. You can inset them a little, extrude them, right click, scale it, and then inset it a little. And you can start to hammer out details here. You do want to keep these things as squares still, so you got to add loop cuts where needed. But you can see how quick this can go, especially for more like boxy designs and stuff like that. It's really simple. Inset. If you inset and press O, you get an outset too, by the way. I just want to mention that. And press extrude. Inset, there we go. Nothing special there. Fast, right? It's probably a little easier than you thought it was going to be, but I want to just like knock out. Let's break up this edge maybe. Like an inset. I'm just going to extrude it in on its normal, scale it in, push it down on Z. So I hit Z twice because I'm using normal right now. And then do another inset. There we go. We could tighten those corners up if needed at this point because this one's pretty high resolution. So you might want to work with it like that. Sculpting on this here is going to be really challenging. Just keep that in mind. It's not going to be that much fun. So, but you do have a subdivision mesh that you can bump up in polygon count. So when you do a remesh or a quad remesh or whatever the case may be at a higher resolution that you want to sculpt on, where it's all more balanced, this still works well. Okay, it works really well for that as well. And sometimes just getting selections going can be a pain because you might want to do strips of something, right? So cursor selector is a lifesaver in my opinion, because we might want to take all those little sections, and maybe we do want these to be just slightly rounded, right? So we could just inset it again, hold control, move it out. Press Shift H, believe it or not. You can grab a section, use that proportional edit, and let's just pull this backside down a little bit. Let's see what happens. Alt H, so we can get some rather interesting stuff going. So this is all the little tricks that SubD modeling offers that most people don't really talk about, I guess. Just not real comfortable working with these kinds of meshes, and they're not necessarily slow, but they can be, right? If you're not real familiar with how to do it, and you haven't spent a lot of time practicing it, it's going to be a little bit slower for you, but it's really not that bad once you get used to it. So we can add a little section like that. So if we can break this mesh up more, that would be ideal. So little sections like this that we might want to break up as well. And this is already pretty good. So what I'm going to do, once again, we're just going to go crazy on the next one, and we'll bring it out here. This one we can move to a collection. Do we have all of it? Okay, yeah, move it to a new collection. I'm just going to call it 3 in this case. I just want to lay these out so we can compare them start to finish as we go through this process. You can already probably tell it's going somewhere, right? So this time we're not going to collapse this one. These are real high poly still, so we don't need to. This one we're going to collapse down 1, down 1. Now we're getting to the high frequency territory. Trying to optimize this thing and get it back to game ready model could be a little bit challenging. So you might have wanted to continue on that last step a little bit more before coming to this resolution here. This is going to be our base basically when we start doing a our high frequencies, right? So we're onto that territory there. So we can do a level 1 subdivision. We don't really need more than that. Turn it off in edit mode. And so here we go. This is the fun part, in my opinion, because we can do all kinds of really cool things here as well that normally would be breaking subdivision surface, or it doesn't seem like good topology or it's bad topology. So for example, like this edge, we select it, and we just want some kind of difference in here in shape and stuff. We can just hit Alt S. Oop, turn proportional edit off. Alt S. We could just push it in like this, and when it subdivides, okay, because if we're doing high frequency detail that bakes into the model, we can get away with some things like this, generally speaking. And we can run these little shapes and these little patterns and designs all around this model, all over the place. Oh, maybe a little bit too, not deep enough. So we can do things like that. You will have a little bit of an issue trying to go in between the seams if you already cut them out. That's why it's usually best to wait on these things until you're more around this step. And you can just start directing the pattern, but not necessarily digging into it yet, right? Sometimes that's just what you want to do. It can be a little bit daunting looking at this. Control select, Control Shift select. You can do all kinds of cool stuff like that. Not a big deal. You can still do bevels on stuff like this, and you can see it's pretty wild. I don't think that one's going to work out for us there. You can do bevels on selections. So if you want to do that, you could. You can inset. You can inset again and push it in. So you can get some really fine panel lines. I think that's what a lot of people don't recognize right off the bat when you work with this kind of stuff, is that eventually you'll get to this point where you can do this. All right. Like if I want to get rid of that, and let's say I want to, I'm going to inset it a little bit. I want to press Shift H, and I'm just going to grab these front faces using proportional edit. I'm going to pull them in. I'm going to go back to global instead of using normal. I'm going to pull them on an X, and I just want it to curve inwards a little bit, right? Hit Alt H, you can see what's going on here. This is what we get. In the rare instance, you see this little shape here at the back. That's because of that extra polygon there. You could surface slide this and try to balance it out, but this is another great time to turn off your subdivision first, go into sculpt mode, and you can actually break out the smooth tool here, turn the strength down. We're just going to turn on wireframe so we can see what's going on, but we can click around in here a little bit and just separate them. Right? It might not be perfect, but it's a little bit easier than doing that by hand. So this is why I was saying you can't use that sculpt tool. Right. Let's go back to object mode, turn on the subdivision again, check it. Unfortunately, you can't see the results in real time, but that's just a fun way of working, in my opinion. It's something you can check into or try to utilize, right? Might have wanted to push that up before we pushed that in. So we might have wanted to follow that curve up there. It wouldn't be impossible to do. We could have just selected more out to the side there. All right. So you do want to pay attention to your designs and your patterns and all that. But doing circles at this point isn't too hard. It can be a little bit daunting though, because you could actually just loop tools circle this. But let's turn on surface slide real quick. We can circle it. We do have proportional editing on. You can see this does kind of work, but it's not good once you start doing this stuff. So you're going to have to really think about your circle sizes here and how they're working out for you. Okay. You see they work pretty well on these higher density meshes too. Actually, we don't need to do that. Let's just inset it. Set it. Oh, we got to turn off surface slide real quick. Set it again. Set it again. Could add a loop cut in there if we wanted, but I don't think it's required. You can see there's a little bit of a shading issue here. There's just no border to this really. It needs to be a little bit more of a border. So I'm going to press Inset and hit O to do that. Outset. There we go. We can turn off edge rail if we want. That might make it a little bit nicer. Hold middle click real quick. There you go. And that might get rid of some of that distortion in the shading there. Absolutely looks a lot better than it did. So there we go. And think about that. That's how small that detail is. All right. We can also do loop cuts. I'll ask them still. Slight differences. This adds so much to it, in my opinion. It's fantastic. Little sections like this. Maybe we want to push it in. We can do that. That one, I think I'm going to actually go back a second. I'm going to do it right here instead. Push it in. Pretty heavily on this one, I think we can get away with. Yeah, not too bad. Some of these here, you can actually dissolve them, and that will flatten it back out. You can add loop cuts back in, and you'll see that looks much more sharp now. Well, maybe you can see it a little bit anyways. So like if you did it all the way to the top to the bottom, it would be even more apparent when you do something like that. Okay, so very sharp detail now. So you can do that all over if you need to. Here's a cool trick. If you use selection method, cursor select, you just select like a set. Selection, like I was saying earlier, the one we're looking for is loops and rings, right? These are rings or selection, I don't know, just edges, I guess. But if you select by loops, it does this number. So you can select by loops real quick and then knock that out, readjust the resolution. All right, this is why that topology is so important. It's extremely useful to be able to do this kind of stuff because you might want to slam something in there. This edge, you might want to hit Control-Shift-R. Then you can do Control-Shift-R and E usually. You can do a bevel like that. Now, you have to be careful with these a little bit. Sometimes they don't actually behave like a normal bevel, and they can cause problems. But generally speaking, they work out pretty well. You see this one's kind of doing it naturally there. Okay. So this probably needs to get mirrored over. I was planning on doing a little bit more to these, but short video like this, trying to keep this video short anyways. A lot of times can't do everything I want to do, but these projects can run you all day, to be honest. I mean, it's not like you're for sure going to be done anytime in a short manner, right? Like, you could be working on these for quite a while. You can also do like shortest path selections, just randomly through mesh to like break it up too. This is pretty wild. You can see we only got up to there. We actually need to make it to either the symmetry point or somewhere like right there maybe. And we can do this. Gotta select again, okay. Then we can just do bevels, okay? You can use triangles, guys, especially on these high resolution meshes. So if you did like an inset and then another inset, just knock out a little tiny panel detail. And there you go, right? It's a very small breakup to that whole design or that whole pattern. You can still inset large sections as well. Just add in a loop cut here, right? Okay, so let's do some things real quick to go to the multi-res. I just want to point this out. We're going to go with this section. Let's try that selection again. We're going to inset, extrude in. We're going to actually scale. I'm going to bring it up and bring it back. Okay, so we got that going on. We could try to rotate these as well. Don't forget that you have the ability to rotate. Maybe we rotate that the other way. So we could do weird stuff like that too. And let's just add a couple loop cuts in here. Okay, so we have something like that going on. I'll do that one more time back here. Going to this point. So just inset, extrude. And this one, whoa, that went way farther in than I thought it did. All right, so this one, I'm gonna rotate to do the opposite of that one. Or so they meet in the middle there. And I might scale it down and pull it back, something like that. Do an inset, a couple loop cuts in there. Bam. All right, so we got some interest going now at least. That area. We can continue doing this kind of workflow all over the place. This doesn't have enough resolution to do what I want, but like these sections here, you can inset again, hold control, press E, S, scale it. There's different things you can do. You could press inset again. Just try to push it in or push it out or whatever. But if you hit E, and just scale it a little bit and just move it. This is the time that you can get away with doing a lot of weird stuff like this. I wouldn't say it's weird, but a lot of those little elements that you see that look like that. This is getting really soft in here because of that way that's set up. And so I'm going to scale it real quick in this direction. It's still rounded and maybe not ideal. This is why you need enough resolution to do stuff like this. This just makes it easier. If you press G twice, you'll see it kind of does this number. If I press E now, it makes it even, but it's with this edge. If I hit F, it makes it even with this edge. Right? So I can push that over and hold that in a little bit like that. It's just something I can do. But you can play around with these. Oh, something else to mention here. It's not going to work well right now on that, but when you're doing when you're scaling something, for example, I'm going to use a new mesh real quick, just to demo this. Like say you had a mesh that was like this, right? And you're working, well, I don't know why it's way over there. The cursor's way over there, I guess. If say you're scaling this, like you know you can scale like this and flatten it back out, right? But if you scale past the 0 point, keep going, you could invert it. look for that when available to do that, because it's really quite useful. It's something you might want to use. You know, just depends. I think this here, this edge here, I'm going to just add an inset and just hold control, pull it out. Use edge rail again. Well, inset first, extrude, scale, bring it down. Inset again, cut if needed. So that's fun. You can always grab these sections, by the way. And if you do a select more, control shift and select more, do a shift H. You can work on this in this area a little bit easier this way. Alt click, alt middle click. That might help. You can do like alt S's here and do things like this. There's a lot of modeling techniques or tricks that you could utilize. So you might not need that inset down here necessarily. Might want to just like balance things out and stuff like that. So can do things like that. The hardest ones are always going to be working those edges. Working the edges is pretty challenging, not going to lie. Because you can't just do what you would normally do. You try like doing an extrude and like scale, flatten, maybe bring it in, scale it down or something like that. But it's just not, it's not like a Boolean cut, right? It's pretty janky right now. So you'd have to figure out how to balance that a little bit more efficiently. Maybe doing some insets, some outsets, running different kind of edge flows around it and all that fun stuff. So I'd probably do a video on that one later on. But for the scope of this tutorial anyways, or this video, I think we're going to skip that section for now. And all right, so it did not work on this one at all. Let's do it real quick. I'm just going to add some very blocky stuff in here. I don't even know if I'm going to actually, I probably should inset that, but yeah, we'll just do that all the way through. Why not? Just like little holes in here or something. And by the way, you can do that if you want. You can add holes in your mesh by doing bridge edge loops. So let me give you an idea. I'm going to go to a side view, use the cursor selector. Like let's say I wanted these little sections here. So this probably wouldn't be good for game models necessarily at this point, but if you're doing like film or something, maybe, I don't know. But like say you wanted some little strange element like that, you can control E bridge edge loops, right? See how that works out? So you can get away with things like that if needed. Fun one. Let's go ahead and fly through this. I'm only doing one side here real quick. We're going to mirror it. Inset, extrude in. We can extrude in and do individual scales. There you go. Inset it again a little bit. So now we just have to run through and add 2 loop cuts basically. All the way through, right? Boom. Just like that. We're going to go ahead and start mirroring everything. Hopefully it all mirrors correctly. All right. Should be good to go. Looks about right. A lot easier than you probably thought. Huh? Looks complicated, not really. Really what's going to make your models or designs stand out though is if you take the time to add the little details that you want, like changing these shapes around. Don't just work off this grid. Really take the time, shift things around, make it cleaner in some, or like make it sharper in some areas, or beveled specifically in certain areas, or chamfered, and really work it. You know, this is very kind of standard, basic 3D modeling though, for the most part. So kind of something like from Halo or whatever was the idea for this, anyways. But you get the idea. And so one last thing I want to do, because it just feels like it needs to be done, is this back section. Just going to inset it and extrude it in, scale it. Well, maybe not scale it. Just inset it again. There. We'll leave a little square section there. Maybe we'll do a inset, extrude, scale it a little bit. There we go. Something like that. And we could just go on forever, probably. It would take, we'd be here all day doing this, right? Okay. That, duplicating it out. This, we're moving to a new collection. We're calling it, what were we at? 4? 4 iterations now. Just keep that in mind. We can turn 4 off. These here are interesting because we can pretty much leave them as is if we wanted to, or we could apply them with the level 1. It doesn't really matter. I think applying it works well, but it's up to you at this point. So I'm going to apply this one. This is a level 1, and we should be matching resolutions here. So if I apply this one, I think they'll match pretty close. Yeah, they're pretty close now. So we can't apply that one, apply that one, apply that one. And this is what's going to separate your model right here. So this would be your high frequency, high detailed model, right? And this is really what's going to separate you from doing models like everybody else. It's the amount of time you put into it. It's just that little bit of extra it's going to perhaps like sculpting, right? So if we apply a multi-resolution modifier on this, I want to point something out here. We can just set it up real quick on all of these. Okay, and we probably should save this at this point. I haven't even saved it yet. It's a gun thing, yeah. We'll save that. This is why breaking it up into multiple pieces can be extremely useful. Believe it or not, before we applied this subdivision or anything like that, we probably shouldn't have applied this last one. We could have UV mapped it, right? And we could have set up the UV maps however we wanted perfectly, or whatever the case there. And because of that, we can bake using the multi-resolution under bake settings here. You'll notice that we got to be in cycles for this, but let's switch to it. If we do like normal maps, we can bake from multi-resolution. So normal and displacement. This is where things get interesting because we could actually uncheck clear image. And I'm not doing a baking tutorial here, but the idea is that each model, once you go to this multi-resolution modifier, you can turn down the preview here. We haven't subdivided it yet, but let's subdivide it once real quick. So we're in object mode, right? We can turn the preview off. And so it will only show up in sculpt mode, right? We'll go to like subdivide this section 2 times. And preview, we can turn off, or we can turn it to 1 or whatever. Just keep it low. And so it'll always look like this, but in sculpt mode, it'll look like that, all right? And so the reason why this is cool is because you can sculpt the heck out of it. Right now, this one piece is at, in sculpt mode, it's at 1,000,000, right? But in object view, our whole thing is 140,000, okay? This is the trick. Because you can bake the multi-resolution, and I think it has an issue right now. I was reading somewhere. I haven't done it, so I haven't used it in a while anyways. But you can bake this out onto a UV map, okay? And then what ends up happening is that because you click clear image, you put all of these on the same texture, on the same UV map. So you could take this up to as however many polygons your system can handle, your GPU, all right, or your memory, whatever the case, where it can still render and bake. And then you do that one piece, you can bake it onto that texture or that UV map. And then you could do this one, and it'll go to that same texture file. And this one, same texture file. This one, same texture file. So you can end up having a super dense mesh for something that looks really complicated. And bake it down to a normal map or a displacement map. No problems. Like I've taken this up as high as I could on my system and without displaying the polygons here in Blender. So by making sure it stays at a a preview of 0 and just sculpting on it to my heart's content on each individual little section here, I'm able to hit 200 million polygons on an object. But you can't see it in Blender. You can only see it when you bake. Okay? Like when you bake to the texture map and apply that to a low poly. You know what I'm saying? And so it's something you can think about and try and experiment with. I don't know what happened here. Whoops. But anyways, so you get the idea, because we're going into sculpt mode now. And unfortunately, when you do this, you have to go in and out of sculpt mode. It does sit around and wait. But this is 1,000,000, so it's really not that bad. I'm just going to turn it on to maybe a level 1. I want to see if it goes in and out of object mode and sculpt mode a little faster at level 1. I don't suspect it will. Yeah, it doesn't really. Having it bumped up to the preview level, it doesn't recalculate everything every time, so it's a little bit faster, which is nice. But anyways, you can sculpt on this now. You can use the scrape tool. You can add damage. You can add scratches. If you take it up high enough, you can do a lot of high frequency details. They're not really required, by the way. You can add a lot of detail in Substance Painter, so you don't have to necessarily do all your high frequencies here by sculpting. But it can be a nice little effect, and that's what gives everything that AAA polish usually in video games, right? And so if you really put the time and the effort into this, it's a lot of fun. The Crease Tool, by the way, you can set it to fall off sharper, make it small, and do the stroke. Turn on stabilized stroke for everything you do. In my opinion, it works best. So if you're using a pen like me, turn it down really low though. It'll still feel fairly responsive, but it's not going to sometimes it'll get janky if you don't have that on, right? And so what this allows us to do now is we can make this extremely small if we wanted. We can go in and we can add little details here or there wherever needed, right? And that stroke, for whatever reason, just started acting weird. Let's bump it up a bit then. All right. Yeah, you can see it's just a little bit bumpy right now. My tablet's going, I'm pretty sure. But if you want to add little details, you'll see that stabilized stroke actually blends in and out pretty good. Sometimes that's a little bit not wanted or warranted. Also, there's something called persistent base, so keep that in mind. I don't know if this one has it. No, it doesn't. The layer tool has persistent base. You have to basically tap this thing twice, and it might hate you when you do this the first time. But persistent base will let you, if you right click, you can set height, right? And so I can pull out a certain level. I'm going to Control Z back real quick. Control Z gets really slow on this, by the way. I might have to hit persistent base again. We're going to turn it negative. So we can actually use this like this, in this manner. And you can see that resolution, it does not like this right now, but persistent base will, you see how, that's what the normal thing you can expect there. So let's go ahead and do persistent base. We'll hit it twice. We'll see if it works. It should. Okay, so now we can't really dig into that same area more and more and more. So we can do details like this at this point as well. You really probably should have modeled these, to be honest, because you can see the, even though we're at a pretty high resolution, 1,000,000, we probably want to go closer to like 5 million, 4 million, or maybe even higher. You can take these things up to like 10 million usually, no problem. But you can see it just doesn't look as good that way, right? But you can do that because if you want to just like layer in a bunch of crap real quick, you could. And so you can easily go around and do this number, right? So it's just kind of pointing this out real quick. Probably going to Control Z back on this, but you can also go up as well. So you don't have to just stay there and go down. This is a great time to use decals and things as well, or alphas. Actually, I'm going to strike that back. I want to mention something about alphas. Using alphas right now, we don't have symmetry on either. Probably should have turned that on. You do want to make sure you turn symmetry on. You don't get an opportunity to remesh this, really. So just keep that in mind. But the alphas don't usually transfer to the other side very well, right? Like from one side to the other, it's not going to happen very well, generally speaking. And then also your brush. A lot of people use front faces only. I found this to have an error. So that front faces only will also cause the mirror across to become inaccurate, and it's not good. So be careful with things like that. You really got to take your time on these and just kind of fill out what's going to work and what's not going to work for you. Alphas will work, the symmetry just gets messed up, so keep that in mind. And because of that, it's a little bit of a problem. So I would highly recommend just touching up the details a little bit, like trying to do patterns, maybe not necessarily the greatest thing, but just touching up details with like scrapers, maybe just like adding damage or little scratches or whatever, just little things like that. I think that goes a long way at this point, and you can do that. Another thing that works fairly well that you might want to try out is when you're in edit mode, if you can, this is going to be a little bit rough here, but we're going to try it. Maybe not there. Let's not do it there. Let's do it down here. Alt Q, we'll switch to this one real quick. Oh, we don't have a, we do have a multi-res on. We don't have it subdivided. We're going to do one for now. Okay. Go back into edit mode. I want to select this area real quick. So Control and Shift select. There you go. Alt Shift and select one already. You can unselect the loop. Okay, so go over here, do the same thing. I'm going to show you another little trick too. Check this out. We need to select all that. Select your X, extend. If you don't click extend, it unselects this one. Okay. So now we have those selected. Go to Sculpt Mode. In Sculpt Mode, we can do a face set, initialize face set by edit mode selection. Bam. Just like that. All right. We're going to use a cloth tool here. I like using the cloth. There's different methods of using this. It's set by default to drag. I like using grab personally, but there's also like inflate and some other things in here. So we're going to use grab. And also check face set, right? So if we start in the green, it's only going to affect the green area. It's pretty simple. And if we make it large, it doesn't matter. Let's not make it that large, maybe. So hopefully it doesn't freeze up here because we got quite a bit of polygons going. And you can see we can kind of bump that around. You can hold shift and smooth it back out if needed. Sometimes it can be a little hard to get it to do what you want it to do, but not impossible. All right. I think it's too strong though. No, actually that's not too bad. I like that. All right, so we can do that. We can do it over here as well. Just little subtle effects, you know. Even if you smooth it back out a little bit, it's really not that bad. You can add more detail later on if you need to. Using alphas or something. You can use alphas. I'm not saying don't use them. You're just not going to be using them with symmetry. That's the big takeaway from that. Try to pull that one back over and see what happens. It happened. I don't know if it's good, but it happened. Really sluggish while I'm recording. This is usually like real time. I don't know. It's pretty slow right now though. All right, so we'll leave it there for those. I think you get the idea. Because it's kind of annoying me at this point. But you can go crazy on these things. There is absolutely no limit. So I'm just going to add some scrapes to this all over. Kind of beat it up, wear it down a little bit. And then that's going to be pretty much it for this video, guys. I just wanted to go over this workflow. This is something that if you do a lot of really heavy changes, by the way, you're probably going to have to take this model without the multi-res, or like you can apply the base. So you can make the base low, like the base model here. It's not low poly, but you can apply it. So all of these details take effect on that original mesh you started with. You might have to do that and then go back and optimize it and turn it into a game model later on as well. It really just depends on how much you kind of customize the shape here. If you go heavy with a lot of sculpting detail, you'll probably have to do that. So it's pretty easy to work a SubD model though back into a lower polygon format, or a lower polygon model. But you definitely want to be careful. Okay. And I'm not using symmetry, I should be. Okay. We're on X symmetry. Just want to kind of give this some scuffing effect everywhere. You see if it does dig into sides like that and stuff, be careful with that. Use the mask tool. Just a reminder, the mask tool here, you can just paint it out like super fast. It's not a big deal. And then so when you are using like a scraper or something, you don't have to worry about like digging into that so much. It's not so bad then. All right, you can always press A. There, mask filter. Anyways, you can press A and you can clear masks as well. All right. All right. So you can see how that works. Grow them, shrink them, whatever, smooth them, all that fun stuff. Let's just knock in some wear, make it look a little bit beat up on the edges here, perhaps. I'll turn on size sensitive radius. I'm using a pen, so sensitivity or radius, pin pressure sensitivity. I'm trying to get the words out here. It's a little challenge. Don't judge me. All right, and so there we go. Now we can get this going. I think the tip here would probably be like the most beat up, right? Okay, you don't want to overdo this either. But yeah, something like that maybe. Smooth that one out a little. Most of these brushes, if you aren't using alphas or that back facing option, ignore back facing, they work fine for the most part. You're not going to have any major issues, I think. So if you want to go through with clay strips, here's a little tip about this one. You can turn on roundness, turn it up. Maybe not max, but turn it up. And then turn on stabilized stroke for this one for sure. Only thing about stabilized stroke is it does this thing where it fades in and fades out. I want to be able to turn it off usually, but generally it's not always a thing, so can't really do that. So I'm just going over the symmetry. It doesn't bother me right now, but you can definitely sculpt in detail that you want. See how that's going? Don't accidentally sculpt on something you're not supposed to. Let's make that bigger because it's starting to look too monotonous. It's looking mundane and boring. Sometimes you can actually just wait until this sculpting takes place to work out the ends of those guys. That one that's dipping in here, that little seam. And of course we could take this up a level. I'm not going to do it while I'm recording, but I think you get the idea, right? Let's use the draw or the crease tool with it set to sharp, as I said before. Some of you guys might be skipping around the video. That's okay, nothing wrong with that. But this has been configured and changed, right? So I just want to point that out. A lot of times this still isn't sharp enough for me, and I like to turn the spacing down. Use a custom one. You can see here's sharp right here. Whoop, sharp right here. Boom. I'll do things like that sometimes. Just doesn't. Sometimes it just doesn't feel sharp enough. Sometimes you can do that a little too much too. You might have to bump it out just a little bit. You can see my resolution starting to mess with that area right there, right? So it's getting a little bit janky in there with the resolution. Well, where are we at right now? On this one, we're only at 200,000. Oh no. Yeah, we are. Okay. Let's subdivide that one more time then. It should smooth that out, smooth this out. Now we're at 800,000. Okay. It's much better. There we go. You see the difference here? Not perfect, but it's much better. I should turn on smoothing. You can see smoothing. When you don't have smoothing on here in Blender, they need like a basic smoothing option without using the lazy mouse thing. It's like some regular brush smoothing from like the other programs, Photoshop or Krita. You know, it would be like the biggest improvement I think to Sculpt Mode ever for hard surface, anyways, or even organic probably. I don't know. Lazy mouse isn't really that bad. It's just that when you're trying to do like crisp little details, you need like that in between smoothing basically, like little textures and stuff. No smoothing, at least with my tablet, it sucks. It's no good. So, and then this is just a little bit too unresponsive, and that adjustment there doesn't help it much. So this is probably like a better idea to do things like this, right? All right, so we can make designs or whatever. I could have continued that one out, right? We're not going to jump to that one yet. We're going to keep going down here and bust out the scraper again. So something you could do is this clay strips one. Turn on, make sure pin pressure sensitivity is on. Turn this one sharp. Watch what happens here. Now you can turn the spacing down. I always turn them down to 1, but we're going to turn the tip roundness back down. And because it's sharp now, turn that stroke smoothing on. Because it's sharp now, we'll set it to negative. Smooth that real quick. We can kind of draw with it in a weird way. Like this. And add these little surface effects with it. It's kind of nice. I'm going to soften it up a bit and go back over it real quick. Right here. And we can smooth it out. It needs a rebuild brush, I think. I think that's what Blender also needs. A rebuild brush and a basic brush smoothing. So we can do those creases now. Turn that off. So crease brush feels like you're using a pencil almost in clay. Which is kind of nice. It's actually probably the most useful tool when it comes to like sculpting in my opinion, but I don't know, it looks like it just got really damaged up right there. Maybe a little unnatural, that kind of setup, but unrealistic perhaps, but we can do like some scratches. If we turn the pressure sensitivity down a little bit, you can see we can do like some pretty good scratches real quick. I don't want to get it too carried away, and I want to keep these kind of like sharp too on the edges. Just a little bit of them. Smooth a little bit out, like here or there. All right, so now you have a ridiculously unmanageable model here in Blender. You should by the end of all that. Take your time with it. Don't rush through it. Like I'm trying to do this as fast as possible, but you can see it's already getting there. It's like kind of getting there. Really plan out your sections like of a model, different parts, different pieces. Get them to line up first. worked them out to this point. This is more of like a production run of 3D modeling, right? Like you could really push this to its limits if you wanted to. That's just kind of interesting. It looks like it sandwiches down in there somehow or something. So if I had did like a little drop down here with kind of where they can collapse and expand together or something, and then maybe made this look like a little hydraulic piece or whatever, you get the idea, right? All kinds of fun stuff you can do with 3D models. Make them functional. Even if it's sci-fi, the more believable it is or the more realistic it is, the better it looks, generally speaking. So anyways, I'm going to go ahead and save it now. Let's go ahead and turn all of these back on. See if my system can handle it. And so there we go. We have the full process now on how to do this. And I'm going to hide that real quick. Then I guess I'll use this as the thumbnail. So hope you enjoyed this video. And have fun, all right? So I'll check you out in the next one. Take care.